Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the FBO Fashion Source Design Studio. Today, I'm going to be continuing with my basic flat pattern making lesson, which is just a basic way to draft the basic foundation set. So last week we drafted the front bodice, and so today we're going to draft the back bodice. So I wanted to just remind you guys of some things. Sometimes with pattern making we have terms that are used interchangeably, but as pattern makers and general garment makers, we need to make sure we know the difference between pattern drafting, flat pattern making, and a working pattern with the basic pattern set is used for. Okay. Okay. So pattern drafting is a set of pattern making. It depends. Pattern drafting depends on measurements, like we talked about last week. It's a system of pattern making that depends on the measurements taken from a person or a dress gown. It's used to make a basic foundation, and you will start every pattern that you make using that foundation in that particular size. So if you're going to draft or have designs that run from size 2 to 12, then you would have a basic pattern set, a 5-piece set for each one of those sizes. And all of the designs you make would start off with those 5 pieces. It would be derived from those 5 pieces. And the way that once you have the 5-piece basic master pattern set complete, then you would use your flat pattern making skills, the principles and techniques of pattern making, a flat pattern making, in order to change those patterns, the master patterns, into whatever the particular design is that you have. So, in order to draft a pattern, you have to have a set of measurements. In order to make a pattern, you have to have a pattern that is already made. Okay? A working pattern is the copy of the master pattern that you will use to apply the principles of pattern making to. That would be dart manipulation, added fullness, and contouring, using one of the two technical techniques, which would be the slash and spread method or the pivot method. Okay, but that pattern is a pattern that you would get derived from the master pattern. Okay, and that would be your working pattern, which ends up being a pattern that you actually apply the changes to. From that pattern, you would make the final production pattern or the sample, and then you would make the final pattern from that sample. Okay, so we've got some terms here we need to make sure as pattern makers we understand the difference between pattern drafting, flat pattern making, the basic pattern set, and working pattern. The reason you take a pattern making class is so that you can learn how to draft those basic pieces in this desired size, and how to look at any design you have and learn the principles and techniques you would use to change the master patterns into that desired design. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, see you at the table. So I'm going to set the camera so that we can focus on the table. And I have the table set up like I generally do for drafting patterns with all of my tools, and you want to always start with a fresh workspace that's prepared for the work you intend to do that day. All right? So I want to make sure you guys can see what I'm doing here. Okay. All right. So hopefully you guys have a good view of the table. All the useful tools here, the notcher and the hole punch are generally used after we are done with the pattern. All right. And of course, I have my pattern weights and then my removable tape. Okay. And so you guys will remember that on last week we did the what paper trying to blow away there. We did the front bodice. Okay. And so now today we're going to complete the back pattern. I just want to remind everybody that you cannot do the sleeve until you have the front and back bodice complete. So that's why we're doing it in this particular order, okay? All right. So as usual, anytime you get ready to draft a pattern, you're going to need to have a set of measurements. I have a size 8 that I'm using for this particular draft. Let's make sure. And so I'm going to start off by making myself a guideline at the top of the page. Okay? And usually this guideline is just because when you start to draft, you don't want to be at the end of the paper. Okay? So I'm just going to make myself a guideline right here. That's the top of my paper. And then I'm going to measure down from this guideline where I want my waist to be, or the bottom of my pattern. And in this case, that's going to be the full length of my back pattern. And the full length of my pattern in the back is 16. So I'm going to put my tape here and come down 16 inches, which would be right here. Okay. Once I have that, then I'm just going to use my ruler to make a straight line down the page to that point so that I can get the bottom of my pattern here. Then I'm going to square a line straight across, and I'll have my pattern almost blocked in, okay? Alright, so now the next thing I want to do is, this is going to be the top of my pattern. So this is the shoulder, this is the center, the side seam here. I'm not going to, so I'll show you what I'm talking about is when you have the front and back pattern and you're drafting, you don't want them both to be facing this way. So see, so when I draft the back, I'm going to make sure that it's this way. So the center back of my pattern would be here. Okay? All right. So I'm just going to make myself a little guideline there. Let's move this down a little bit. All right. Now, since I'm using my measurements from a dress form in the size 8, it's not like when you would do when you're drafting for a real person, because all the numbers don't come out neat and perfect, like, you know, because we're real people. So just when you start drafting, I always start my students out with the measurements from a dress form. Once you get familiar with how to take how to prepare the body for measurement and the form for measurement,
and become very good at taking measurements, then I will allow you to go ahead and take the measurements from a human being, a real person, okay, and draft a pattern set, because it's a whole nother animal when you start to work with real figures, which is the goal, right? All right, so now I basically have a block, and so I have, this is my center back, so I'll put CB here. All right, and then I'm going to mark my back line, which in the front would be my bust line, but we don't have a bust on the back, so I'm going to mark my back line. And my back line is going to be at the same place that my bust line would be on the front. Okay? So in this case, I'll use my pattern weights. Here's how my pattern would look. Alright. And so here is my bust line. I can see it through the paper, so I can go ahead and mark that. And then right above that under is my underarm. There's my chest or upper bust. Again, we're on the back, so there is no such thing as bust in the back. So we've got our back line here, and then we've got our, I call this the top, this is the top of where your bra, back bra strap would be. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and draw those in. Again, you want to make sure your lines are as straight as possible. There we go, and I like to use this ruler to just line up against a straight line. So now this is, I'm going to put BL here for back line, and then I'm going to come here and we'll put my back other line there. Alright, so now I'm going to measure up from the bottom and mark my center back line. Okay, so I can't copy that from the front, because in the front, if we take a measurement straight up and down the front, we're going to have our bust line, which is going to make our measurement be longer. But if we do it where on the back, we don't have that, so this measurement is going to be different. So you don't want to copy that from the front pattern. So my center back length is 15. So I'm going to measure up from the bottom 15 inches. So here's 15 here, all the way up, and here is my center back line, which is also my where my the back of my neck measurement would start. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to do is across the top of the page is we're going to mark our back shoulder width. Remember, we took this front shoulder width measurement. Remember, that's from your sleeve line to sleeve line across the front, and we have to take this measurement across the back. They're not the same. Okay, so we have our back shoulder width is 14, which half of that would be 7, and we're going to add 1/4 inch ease. So let's go ahead and measure that. Okay. And I'm measuring from the center back into the pattern. Okay, so if I have 7 inches, then I'm going to add 1/4 inch ease to that. Okay, all right, and that would put me here for my shoulder tip. All right, now remember we talked about that if this is our shoulder, we certainly don't go straight across like this. If you have a person facing you and you're looking at there's the center front of their body and their shoulder tip, you'll notice that it slants down. There's a slope, so we call that a slope, shoulder slope. So our shoulder slope measurement, we have to take one for the front and one for the back. That measurement starts at the center back instead of the center front for our back measurement. So it's the center back up towards the shoulder tip, the amount of whatever your slope was, because this is a measurement you would have taken just like this on the body. Okay, for us, it was equal to 1/2 inch down. Okay, so our shoulder slope was a 1/2 inch shorter than our full length. Okay, and once we have that marked, then we're going to mark our shoulder length. How far is it from where your neck and shoulder connect to your shoulder tip? And on the average woman, that is 5 inches. And on our form, it was 5 inches. So what I'm going to do is find 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. Okay, and then I'm going to take my ruler and just turn it until it touches where my neckline would be, right here. Okay, now I could just hand draw it in, or I could just use my curved ruler and just go ahead. Remember, your rulers are a guide, so I want my ruler to touch here and touch here. As long as that's happening, got myself a nice little curve there, and I can go ahead and draw in my shoulder line right here. All right, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in my waist and my waist dart. So we have a total of at least 4 darts on every flat pattern. You'll have more the greater the difference is between the waist measurement and the bust measurement. In this case, our dart is 1 1/4. All right, on the front it was 1 1/4, and so it's going to be 1 1/4 here too. So the first thing I need to do is find the halfway point here. And now on the front, we used the way we found out where our first dart leg was to come in 3 1/2 inches because that was half of our bust span, the distance between your 2 bust points. So in this case, that would put us right here for our dart. Okay, all right, so I'm going to square a line from the bust line down. All right, and notice, remember in the front, we had the bust point right here, so we had to make sure we didn't go inside of the bust radius because we didn't want those to sew up our darts and have a cone, like a sharp cone like we used to see in those old bras. So here we don't have bust in the back, so we can let the dart come all the way up to the back line. And our dart is 1 1/4, so I like to take my tape and find 1 1/4 inch and just fold it in half and put that measurement on half of each of that amount on both sides of my dart leg. Let's make it really easy instead of doing a whole lot of math. So that's 1 leg, and then I'll just take the same the tape and move it to the other side, and then I'll put my other leg there. Okay, and now I can go ahead and connect my dart legs to my back line. Okay. There we are. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is come here and we want to square a line down from our shoulder tip here equal to half of our armhole measurement. Now when we did our armhole measurement all the way around our armhole, right at the shoulder, it was 14 inches. When we marked that on the front pattern, we had to add 3/4 of an inch to that measurement, okay, because we curve out in the front and we need the armhole in the front to be a bit longer. When we do the back, we don't have to do that, so we just square a line down that is half of the shoulder width, which in this case is 7 inches, and we're going to add 1/4 inch ease. Okay, So we'll come here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then here's the 1/4 of an inch here. Okay. So we're a little bit below where our chest upper bust would be. Okay. All right. So now we're going to square a line out at that point to the side seam. Now, more than the chest measurement and more than the center back length and the full length is different from the front. Okay, so when you're marking your side seam, which is what this is here, after you get your side seam in, you want to make sure that you come in 1/4 of an inch right at that point, because that makes the garment side seam line up like it should, because there's a difference between the front and the back of the pattern, and you want that side seam to be at the side seam, so that helps make this going in 1/4 of an inch in the back on the pattern makes that happen. All right, so now this measurement from the center front out to the side seam, right where that measurement is there, the underarm, is going to be your chest divided by 4 plus whatever ease you want to add. So our chest divided by 4 was 8 and about 8 1/4, a little bit more. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So here's 8, and that's a little bit more than a half. So we're going to come here and mark a half. Okay, so we've got 8 1/2. All right. So that's the end of our pattern there. So watch this. So if I bring this down, and for first let's test ourselves, because we got to make sure that our patterns match up here. So if I measure my waist divided by 4 should have been 8 inches. This is a little bit more than 8 inches, and it's because we have our dart added in here. So if this is 8 inches, we need to add, here's 8, 1 inch plus 1/4, which puts us almost where we're almost line up right perfect. Okay, if we take that and we connect that here, here's what our pattern will look like, right? Also, we've got to go in 1/4 of an inch. So if we go in 1/4 of an inch, that's going to put us right here. Okay. Right here. Okay. So we're going to connect those points. Okay. All right. So now when people first start to draft patterns, in order to get that curve like you see in an armhole can be a little bit difficult, because you don't want to have that curve go in too deep here. So what I always suggest is that you draw yourself a little guideline between 1/2 inch and 1 inch, and so that you don't go in here too deep. Okay, so now I've got myself a little guideline right there. Something else that helps to make sure you can draw in a nice armhole is to make sure that you divide the armhole up in half and find the halfway point. You need to do that anyway, because we have a shoulder dart that we're going to add in. Okay, so there you go, that's the halfway point. All right, so I'm going to take that half and just continue that line all the way across. Okay, all the way across. And then I'm going to measure my shoulder. I know it's 5, and I'm going to find the halfway point. Just divide that in half. Okay, mark the halfway point, and then I'm going to square line straight down. It should be diagonal because this slopes down, right? So if I put this correct, then I'm going to have a line that's like this, right? And then remember that that dart I told you we were going to put in, the shoulder dart. So I'm going to take that dart. It's going to be in 1/4 of an inch dart. So it's going to be a very small dart. And when you do your sample fitting, it may end up being larger or smaller, but it will most likely end up being transferred into the armhole. So I'm going to put it into the armhole here, and then I will move it up to the shoulder once I cut the pattern out. Okay. Alright, so there you go. So now this is your dart that would be here. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and draw in my armhole. Now usually if you're nervous about drawing an armhole, then I say draw it in 2 parts. But the back is a little bit easier than drawing that armhole in the front, because look at what I'm doing here. As long as I'm touching the bottom here and touching this wall, this area right here, like this, and coming down here and touching this, I'm in good shape. Right? Alright, so I can use my curve to draw it in nice. Alright. So believe it or not, once we put the information on here, our back pattern is done. Okay? I'm going to do the same thing I did in the front. We want to note that this is the back of the pattern. Okay, the back bodice. This is a size 8. There is no seam allowance added, so no, that's 8. We need to cut 2. Okay. And of course, I'm always going to put my grain line on here. Alright. And remember, with that grain line, you want it to cover the pattern. You don't want to draw a little tiny one that doesn't make sure it's straight, that no one can see it. Okay, so now there's my grain line. Alright. Okay, so now I'm going to show you guys what you do to the back pattern. So let me cut this out. Okay, can you bring the scissors with me? One second. Alright, so let's go ahead and cut our back pattern out here. So now that I have my back and front bodice, I can draft my sleeve. And since the sleeve is one pattern piece, but it has a front and a back, then I need to have the front and back pieces that it's going to fit into, right? So it's a good idea to draft these 2 pieces first. Okay. Some people draft the back first, and some people draft the front bodice first. It depends how you want to do it. Again, this is just one way to do this, and this is altered a little bit because I'm trying to make sure that it's simple enough to get new pattern makers started. Okay. When you're doing custom fit, custom pattern making, basically you're going to take more measurements than we have listed here. You're going to make sure that you have all your measurements and all the math is done before you come to the table to work on your pattern. Okay? Alright, so now we can come here and take our pattern, and what we can do is move this dart to the shoulder now if we want to. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to slash right down the center of this dart, 2 not through that point, okay, right there, right here. And then I'm going to slash the point where I want this dart to be moved to, okay, which is right here. And again, I'm careful. I don't want to rip the pattern apart right now. I just want to move that dart. So take a look here and let's see what we can do. So let me get my tape ready. Again, this is the removable tape, and you can tape and pull it up and it doesn't hurt your pattern, so it's a pattern maker's friend. Okay, so I'm going to open up that area by closing up this dart here. So once I move it down here and close it up, that part automatically opens up, and that is known as the slash and spread technique. So slash, spread. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tape this closed, and now my shoulder dart is there. My armhole looks a little bit awkward right now, but again, what I do is just come here and make it nice and pretty, but this pattern is going to go through a lot because we're not done with it, right? So once we get to this point and we have our sleeve, then what we would do is add seam allowance and cut this out of the muslin and actually get it on the body so that we can see how it's going to fit. Okay, all right, so there we have our front and our back patterns. Okay, this is the center back. The only thing I forgot is we have to do our notches in the back. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, you can't get that. Remember, we've got one notch here in the front. Let's know the difference between a front and back pattern. And you've got here in the bottom third of the armhole, you're going to have the 2 notches. So that's 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, 5, 6, 7 1/4. Okay, so I'm going to take 7 1/4. First I'll fold it in half. Okay, half of that is 3 5/8. So I'm going to fold this back one more time. Okay, now I've got the bottom third. Okay, you put me in here. My first notch will be here, and then a 1/2 inch away from that point will be my second notch. Okay. So let's put the notches in there. All right, we did it. So now we've got our front and back pattern. And again, these aren't complete. These are the drafted patterns. We drafted them from the measurements here. We still have to lay this on muslin, add the seam allowance around it, and baste it together and actually put it on the form or the body, whoever we drafted it for. And then we're going to have to do some, we'll write on the muslin, we'll have any changes that need to be made, okay? And once we do that, we'll take the muslin off and then we'll make the adjustments on our paper pattern or use the muslin to make our final pattern, our production pattern. In this case, it would be our master patterns for our 5-piece basic foundation, okay? All right, guys. I hope that this is simple enough for you to follow and be encouraged to learn more about pattern making. You cannot be an excellent seamstress or fashion designer or person that does alterations. Anytime you're making garments for figures, you need to know pattern making so that you can learn more about how to make garments fit and work with the human body. Okay, the more you know about pattern making, the more you'll be able to give your customer or yourself or your family member that custom fit. Okay, All right, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoy pattern making, and I'll see you next time, and we're going to do the sleeve. Bye now.